All right, folks, ready to dive into some seriously deep stuff. Today we're tackling Charles Sanders Peirce.
Oh, a fascinating choice.
This guy, this philosopher, well, he didn't just like dabble in logic. He kind of,
Reinvented it.
yeah, reinvented it. And here's the thing, his ideas are still super relevant. Like even today, they're popping up in places you wouldn't expect, like computer science. And even get this, they're shaping how we think about thinking itself. Pretty meta, right? So we're going deep, really deep, into the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, their entry on Peirce's deductive logic.
Oh, excellent source.
Yeah, we're talking the real deal. So strap in.
All right, well, one of the most fascinating things about Peirce is how he saw right through the limitations of, the old logic system, the one everyone had been using for centuries, Aristotelian logic.
Right, the classic stuff.
It was all about those simple subject-predicate statements, all birds have feathers, that sort of thing.
Yeah, yeah. Useful, but kind of basic.
Exactly basic. But Peirce realized it just couldn't handle the real complexities of human thought.
Like, imagine explaining a love triangle using only those basic statements.
Ha! You'd miss all the good stuff.
All the juicy drama.
Right, it's like trying to explain a symphony with just one note.
Aha, yeah.
Peirce saw that relationships, things like taller than, loves, is a sibling of, these are essential for how we think, to how we argue. But traditional logic, it just couldn't grasp it.
So he was like, hold on, there's a whole universe of reasoning here that we're missing.
Exactly. He saw the gap and he set out to create a system that could actually bridge it.
So, like a logic rebel, breaking free from the old rules.
Absolutely. A rebel with a cause, you could say, and that cause was to develop what he called a logic of relations, a system that could formally express, all those intricate connections between things. And let me tell you, this was huge.
This was a game changer.
A total game changer. It laid the groundwork for pretty much all of modern logic as we know it.
Okay, wow. I'm starting to see where the whole explain thing comes in. Like, if you can express relationships more precisely, you can really explain things at a much deeper level.
You're spot on. That ability to formally represent relationships was a breakthrough. Think about it. Before Peirce, it was like trying to explain, say, causality. The idea that one thing causes another.
Cause and effect.
Right. It was so difficult to express that in a logically rigorous way. But with his logic of relations, suddenly you could start to unpack those cause and effect connections with way more precision.
It's like he gave us a whole new language to explain the why behind things.
Exactly. A language built on relationships.
But hold on, didn't he also go beyond words and symbols? I've heard about these existential graphs, a system where he used diagrams instead of the traditional notation.
Oh, you're talking about one of the most mind-blowing parts of Peirce's work. He was way ahead of his time. He really saw the power of using visuals to represent logic. He believed that diagrams could make these, often very complex arguments more intuitive, easier to grasp.
Like easier for the human brain to wrap its head around.
Exactly. He understood that we humans were visual creatures. We think in images as much as we think in words.
Okay, so this is where I'm really seeing the explain focus come into play. So, like, can you give us an example of how these existential graphs actually work? Like, how do they make something easier to explain?
Sure. Imagine you're trying to explain something like inheritance in biology, how traits get passed down from parents to offspring.
Okay, got it.
Now, you could try to write that out as a bunch of, logical statements using symbols and all those quantifiers we were talking about, but it would be pretty tough to follow. But with Peirce's existential graphs, you could actually draw it out. Visually represent those relationships between the parents, the offspring, the traits. You could see how those traits flow down through the generations.
Oh, so it's like turning a complex argument into, like, a family tree, making it instantly understandable.
Precisely. And it's not just about pretty pictures. Peirce believed that this visual approach could help us actually see those logical relationships in a whole new way, make them easier to analyze, to understand.
And ultimately to explain.
Exactly. And that's the key.
This is seriously challenging how I always thought about logic. It's not just cold, hard symbols on a page. It could be visual, intuitive, maybe even beautiful.
Beautiful, yes. Peirce saw a kind of beauty in the logical structure of the universe, and he believed that diagrams could help us see that beauty, appreciate it.
Okay, so we've got a logic rebel, a champion for relationships, someone who goes visual with diagrams. This is already way more exciting than any logic textbook I ever encountered. But wait, there's more, right? He even questioned the whole idea of truth itself.
Oh, he did not shy away from the big questions. He explored what's called triadic logic, challenging the traditional idea that every statement is either true or false. He introduced a third possibility, indeterminate, acknowledging those areas where things just aren't black and white.
So instead of a light switch, it's more like a dimmer switch.
Perfect analogy. It's about recognizing those shades of gray. Think about the concept of healthy. Is someone who eats fast food once a week healthy? It's not a simple yes or no, right? There's a whole spectrum.
It depends on a lot of factors.
Exactly. And triadic logic gives us a way to represent all those shades of gray.
I'm seeing how this ties back to explain. Sometimes true or false just doesn't cut it. You need more nuance to really explain the complexity of a situation.
Absolutely. Peirce recognized that reality is often messy, ambiguous. So he gave us a more nuanced language to deal with that.
Okay, my brain's already feeling a few sizes bigger just from this first part of our deep dive. But before we disappear down the rabbit hole of triadic truth, I think we need to take a step back
Sure.
and really grasp how Peirce's work on relational logic was the foundation for everything else. We've talked about how Aristotelian logic couldn't handle relations, but what does that actually mean? What kind of reasoning was it missing?
Well, think about a simple statement like Alice is taller than Bob. Aristotelian logic really struggled with this because it tried to force everything into that subject-predicate form. You could try something awkward like Alice possesses the property of being taller than Bob, but that doesn't really capture the direct relationship between them.
It's like saying the sunset has the quality of being beautiful, instead of just saying the sunset is beautiful.
Exactly. It loses the impact, the directness. Peirce recognized that relationships, they need to be treated as first-class citizens in logic. They couldn't just be crammed into existing categories.
So what did he do? Did he, like, create a whole new category called relation?
He did something even more radical. He came up with a whole new system of notation that allowed him to express relations directly without having to contort them into that old subject-predicate form. And a big part of that was his introduction of what are called quantifiers.
Quantifiers. Ooh, that rings a bell.
Oh, you use them all the time without even realizing it. Quantifiers are those little words like all, some, every, and none. They tell us basically how many things a statement applies to.
Right, like all dogs go to heaven, or some people prefer cats.
Exactly. Peirce realized that these quantifiers, they were crucial for expressing the logic of relations. And to make things even more precise, he came up with special symbols to represent them. You've got the universal quantifier, looks like an upside-down A, and
Anything.
it means for all. And then there's the existential quantifier, looks like a backwards E, and that means there exists.
So instead of saying all cats are furry, you'd write something like upside down, a cat's furry.
Precisely. It might seem like a small change, but trust me, it was revolutionary. It allowed logicians to express incredibly complex ideas with a whole new level of precision. And it all came about because Peirce was so determined to conquer this new territory of relational logic.
So this is where we see the power of explain coming in a really big way.
Absolutely. It's all about clarity and precision.
Okay, I'm starting to get it, but can you give me, like, a concrete example, like a complex idea that can only be expressed because of these quantifiers?
Sure. Let's say you want to explain the concept of a limit in calculus,
Okay, getting mathematical.
which is, essential for understanding how things change over time, how they approach a certain value. Before Peirce and his quantifiers, expressing that concept with any real precision was incredibly difficult. But with quantifiers, you can say something like, for any arbitrarily small positive number, there exists a point beyond which the function's value remains within that small number of the limit.
Okay, that's a mouthful.
It is, but it captures the essence of the concept in a way that just wasn't possible before.
I see how those quantifiers are doing some heavy lifting. You can talk about any number and some point, and that makes the whole statement so much more powerful.
Exactly. It's about capturing those subtle but crucial differences.
And this is just the beginning, right?
Oh, just the tip of the iceberg. Once you start combining the quantifiers and relations, you can express an amazing range of ideas. Concepts like continuity, infinity, even the very nature of space and time, things that were just unimaginable before Peirce.
This is like the matrix of logic.
Haha, in a way, yes.
But I have a feeling Peirce wouldn't stop there. This is where those famous existential graphs come in, right?
You're right on track. Peirce wasn't content with just coming up with new concepts. He had to find new ways to represent them.
To make them visible.
And that's where his existential graph, or EG for short, come into play.
Okay, the idea of a visual logic system, it's super intriguing, but before we get lost in diagrams, maybe we should take a quick break, let everyone process this.
Sounds good. A chance to digest all this amazing information.
We'll be back soon to dive into the world of Peirce's visual logic. Stay tuned.
Don't go anywhere. Welcome back, everyone, to our exploration of Charles Sanders Peirce, the logic revolutionary. Last time, we left off with Peirce's, that groundbreaking work on the logic of relations, and of course those handy quantifiers he invented.
Yeah, the alls and the soms.
Right, to help express those those more complex ideas with real precision. So, are you ready to see how he took those ideas and made them visual?
Oh yeah, we were just getting into those existential graphs, those EGs. The whole idea that you can, express logic with diagrams, not just symbols,
It's pretty mind-blowing, right?
totally.
It really shows how brilliant Peirce was. He recognized the power of visual thinking, especially for something, as abstract as logic. And it's not like he just, played around with diagrams. He actually developed, well, a whole system, actually multiple systems, for representing these logical relationships visually.
So we're not talking about just drawing a Venn diagram or two.
Nope, this is way more sophisticated than that.
This is a whole other way of thinking about logic. So where do we even begin?
Well, a good place to start is with his alpha system, which deals with propositional logic. That's, the logic of those basic statements and how they connect.
So like, the sky is blue or cats are furry, right?
These are perfect examples.
So how do you turn those into diagrams?
Peirce's approach is really elegant, actually. He represents each proposition, each statement with a written word or phrase. So the sky is blue, you'd simply write, the sky is blue on the sheet.
Okay, pretty straightforward.
Right. But of course, logic gets more complicated than just stating facts. What happens when you want to connect those statements? Say things like and or not.
Get those logical operators in there?
Exactly. Well, Peirce uses the spatial relationships on the sheet to represent those connections. So to express and, the idea that two propositions are both true, you'd just put them next to each other.
So the sky is blue and cats are furry would become like two separate things on the sheet just next to each other.
Exactly. The placement, the actual position on the sheet, it carries logical meaning. Pretty cool, huh?
Very cool. But what about negation, like the not idea? How do you show that something isn't true?
For that, Peirce uses this concept called a cut. It's basically a closed curve, a line that encloses the proposition that you want to negate. So the sky is not green would be, you'd write sky is green, and then you draw a cut around it.
So the cut is like a visual not symbol?
Precisely.
Okay, I'm starting to get it. But so is that all there is to this alpha system? Just writing out propositions and drawing cuts around them?
You'd be surprised how much you can express with just those two elements. You can build up some really complex logical statements by combining propositions, cuts, and using those spatial relationships between them.
All right, color me impressed. But, logic gets even more sophisticated than just propositional logic. We were talking earlier about first-order logic. The one with those powerful quantifiers, like all in sum.
Ah, yes, and that's where Peirce's beta system comes in. It's designed to handle all those complexities of first-order logic, and this is where his visual approach really shines, because he doesn't just come up with, new symbols for the quantifiers. He actually uses those spatial relationships within the graph itself to represent them.
Okay, now that sounds super abstract. Can we get like a concrete example?
Sure, sure. Let's stick with our cats for now.
Always a good choice.
How would you say all cats are furry in Peirce's beta system? Well, first you would represent the category of cats with a line. Think of it as, like a visual variable.
Okay, a cat line.
Exactly. Then you would attach the property of furry to that line, maybe, write it next to the line or enclose it in a little loop connected to the line.
So it's like visually saying, here's this thing, a cat, and it has the property of being furry.
Yes. But to say that this applies to all cats, well, that's where that cut comes back in.
The trusty cut.
Right. In the beta system, the cut takes on this new role. Instead of just, negating a single proposition, it can enclose a whole section of the graph. It shows that whatever's inside, it applies universally.
So if you draw a cut around the cat line and that furry property, you're saying this is true for every single cat out there.
Precisely. It's brilliant, really. It's a way of visually capturing that whole meaning of the universal quantifier.
You're basically saying everything inside this box, it's true for all members of this category.
Exactly.
That's so clever. But what about those existential quantifiers, the sum or there exists ones? How does Peirce handle those visually?
Oh, he keeps it nice and simple. For existential quantifiers, you don't need any spelling enclosures. You just leave that line, the one representing the category, open-ended. So some cats are black would just be, a line for cats with black attached, but no cut around it.
So it's the presence or absence of that cut that visually tells you the difference between all and some.
You got it. It's like the HUD acts as this visual boundary, defining the scope of what we're talking about.
Wow. Okay. This is getting pretty deep into the weeds of visual logic here. I'm starting to feel like I need a whiteboard to really follow along.
Haha, it's definitely a system that benefits from visual exploration. But the key takeaway here is that Peirce, he wasn't just trying to come up with a clever way to draw logic puzzles. He was really interested in how our minds, how they understand and work with these logical concepts.
That's right. We were talking before about how Peirce's work helps us explain things better. And I'm really starting to see how those existential graphs, they're like this powerful tool for explanation. especially for, complex relationships and ideas.
Absolutely. Think about trying to explain something like the structure of a computer
Oh,
program
yeah.
or, the flow of information in a network. These are inherently visual concepts, and trying to explain them just with, words and symbols, it can be really tough. But with Peirce's EGs, you can create this diagram that shows exactly how all those different parts are connected and how the information flows between them.
It's like turning a complex idea into this map that you can actually see and follow.
Precisely. It makes the explanation so much more intuitive, more accessible.
And that's exactly what Peirce was going for, right?
He believed that this visual representation, it could unlock these whole new levels of understanding, not just for ourselves, but for anyone we're trying to explain things to.
Okay, I am completely blown away by the depth and originality of Peirce's ideas. But, I'm sensing there's even more to explore here. We haven't even touched on his gamma system for modal logic or the philosophical implications of that triadic logic we talked to earlier.
You're right. There's so much more to unpack in the world of Peirce's logic.
We've only scratched the surface.
But, I think we've laid a good foundation here for understanding those core principles of his work.
Agreed. But we definitely need another episode to really dive into those more advanced concepts.
We'll have to pick this up again soon.
But for now, I'm still kind of reeling from the sheer brilliance of this visual logic system.
It really is remarkable. It's a system that's both rigorous and intuitive, a real bridge between the world of, formal logic and how our minds naturally work. A true testament to his genius.
Welcome back to the deep dive. We're still exploring the amazing world of Charles Sanders Peirce and his totally revolutionary work in logic. So far, we've seen how he, completely changed the game by introducing that whole idea of relations.
Right, moving beyond that limited Aristotelian view.
Yeah, and then he kind of blew our minds by representing those relations visually, with those existential
Those
graphs.
EGs, yeah.
Right. But now get ready to enter like a whole new dimension of thought because we're about to tackle Peirce's ideas about truth itself.
Oh, yeah, this is where things get really interesting.
This is the big one.
We've been talking about how Peirce's work helps us explain things, right, in a deeper, more nuanced way.
Right, getting to the heart of things.
And that leads us to one of his most thought-provoking ideas, the idea that the traditional way of thinking about truth, that it's either true or false, that might not be enough.
Hold on, are you saying that everything I learned in Logic 101 is wrong?
Not necessarily wrong, but maybe incomplete. See, Peirce argued that there are situations, where that classic true or false framework it breaks down.
Okay, give me an example. Help me wrap my head around this.
Okay, think about those philosophical brain twisters, like the ship of Theseus. If you gradually replace every single part of a ship, is it still the same ship?
Ooh, yeah, that one always gets me.
Or the Sorites paradox. If you remove one grain of sand from a heap, when does it stop being a heap? These examples, they show us that sometimes things just aren't so clear-cut.
Yeah, those paradoxes always make my head spin. So what did Peirce propose? What's the alternative?
Well, he introduced this idea of a third logical possibility beyond true and false, which he called indeterminate. It's a way of acknowledging that there are gray areas, fuzzy boundaries, where you just can't neatly say something is one or the other.
So instead of a world of black and white, we're dealing with shades of gray now.
Exactly. Peirce recognized that so many of the concepts we use every day, they're inherently vague. Think about, words like tall or wealthy or even happy. These concepts, they don't have like precise boundaries.
So it's all relative, right?
Exactly. There's a spectrum, a continuum. And trying to force them into this binary framework, it leads to all sorts of problems.
Yeah, it's like trying to define, love as simply yes or no. You can't capture the complexity of the experience.
Precisely. So Peirce, he wanted to develop a logic that could handle those more subtle shades of meaning.
So how did he formalize this whole indeterminate thing? Did he come up with a new symbol for it?
He did. In his system of triadic logic, he introduced the symbol L to represent this third truth value, alongside, T for true and F for false.
So it's like he expanded the language of logic itself to better, reflect the the nuances of reality.
That's a great way to put it. He saw triadic logic as a more accurate way, a more powerful way, really, to represent and reason about the world. And this brings us back to that idea of explain, right?
Right. Explain.
By embracing this concept of indeterminate, we can explain things in a more complete way, a more honest way, even acknowledging those areas where things just they aren't so black and white.
Yeah, it's about being honest about the messiness of the real world.
Exactly.
So I'm going to see how this works in practice. Like imagine you're a doctor trying to explain a patient's prognosis.
Okay, yeah.
In some cases, it might be clear that the outcome is going to be positive or negative, but a lot of times there's a ton of uncertainty.
Right. It's rarely a sure thing.
Right. So using triadic logic, you could say something like the probability of a full recovery, it's indeterminate, which is way more accurate than trying to force it into that true or false box.
That's a great example. It really highlights how important it is to be honest about the limits of what we know and the inherent ambiguity of so many real-world situations.
Triadic logic gives us the tools to express that uncertainty in a way that's rigorous and meaningful.
Precisely. It allows us to be both precise and humble at the same time.
This is seriously changing how I think about the whole nature of truth and knowledge. It's so tempting to want those clear-cut answers, but Peirce is reminding us that sometimes the most accurate answer is just it's complicated.
And that's okay. It's a recognition of the complexity of the world we live in.
Wow, this deep dive has been quite a ride. We started with basic logic, went into the world of visual diagrams, and ended up questioning the very nature of truth itself.
It's amazing, isn't it, how Peirce's work it spans across all these different areas of thought.
He was a true pioneer.
A true visionary.
I'm leaving this conversation feeling like my mind has expanded in ways I never thought possible, and I have a feeling I'll be coming back to Pearson's ideas, again and again.
Me too. There's always something new to discover in his work.
And that's what the deep dive is all about, right? Encouraging our listeners to keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep pushing the boundaries of their own understanding.
To keep diving deeper.
Exactly. So until next time, stay curious, folks. 69.